I even heard that back in, medieval times or like Tudor England, those old half-timbered houses, that they would light a smoky fire inside the house and essentially smoke the timber frame to keep the beetles from eating the wood.
While you're living in there? Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Milham.
That's me.
And Rod Watsack, Digital Brand Manager.
Howdy.
Please email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
What's going on at home, Matt?
Not a whole heck of a lot. So, little back scenes magic. We're only, 2-3 days after the last podcast in reality?
Yeah, we have a double header this week.
Yeah.
So not as much time to get stuff done.
Yeah, I did a little sanding. Got covered in drywall dust last night. That's about it.
There is really nothing as insidious as drywall dust, is there?
No. I mean, you can't go to bed like that. So I got a shower.
Unless you're a bachelor.
Yeah, in which case it doesn't matter.
That's right.
Yeah.
How about you, Rob? You've had a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. I mean, I told you last time about my electrical service. Now I'm ready.
Is it all done?
It's all done. Just need to get inspected. And
who does that in your municipality?
I'm not sure who actually comes out and does it. I know in some places it's a separate electrical underwriter, but the only number I have at my building department is for the building inspector, and I've got scheduled for Friday. And
I've often wondered how a residential building inspector can have such far-reaching knowledge as to inspect plumbing, electrical work, structural work, and just like how can they possibly know everything?
Well, I guess they could do a pretty good job of it, but also there's probably just a varying degree of knowledge in those people in those roles. Hopefully you get a good one.
In Pittsburgh, the electrical inspection was done by a third party, and the gentlemen that I worked with were always former electricians. So I can see how they would be supremely knowledgeable in this stuff, but it would seem tough to learn enough about all those individual trades to be, informed enough to be inspecting them.
Yeah. Just walk around with a checklist, go through an 8-hour course, show you some pictures of what right looks like.
I tried to take the practice test for becoming a residential building inspector in Connecticut, and I can tell you it is very hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, and especially it's one thing to walk through a rough-in in a new house, and you know what you're looking for, and everything is clearly laid out. But when you're working in a basement in a house from the 1870s, I actually went around and helped the electrician and his assistant when we were trying to identify all the circuits when he was done running. Because basically he took every single wire and ran it to an individual circuit because there were some that were combined in the box in kind of sketchy ways. And rather than, he just wanted to get
Start
it done
clean.
and tidy and clean and later on we can go and consolidate some if we find that we have to. But it was a challenge identifying some of the circuits, and my knowledge of the history of the house helped a lot because I was like, oh yeah, there used to be a boiler and there was a kick heater over here and there was a plug in the living room that got eliminated and the wire got tucked down underneath the floorboards and so I probably saved him a good half hour just in my knowledge of the history of the house in identifying those circuits. So I can't even imagine when you look up at the ceiling in an old basement and see that ball of spaghetti to be able to know what's what if you're not an experienced electrician.
Did you have knob and tube left in your wiring system?
To my knowledge, all the knob and tube has been eliminated from the house. You can still see the evidence of it in the basement ceiling everywhere.
All the little
insulators.
Yeah.
But no, the previous owners ran a sub panel up to my attic. And so everything from the upstairs is fed from above, and everything in the first floor is fed from below. So it's the nice thing about that is that you have good access to everything throughout the house. That's the benefit of, I guess, having a basement and an attic.
Sure.
But
what else you been doing? That's
that's one thing. And this past weekend, a friend of mine a few months ago offered to we were having a big barbecue, and he offered to cook for the barbecue. He's really good at grilling and smoking, and so bought all the meat, cooked all the meat for the barbecue, and in return, my wife offered my services to him to build. He's like, oh, I need a wood shed. I've got this wood stove. I need a wood shed.
Rob can do that.
Oh yeah, Rob could help you build a wood shed. Then I find out that he wants a woodshed that'll hold 6 cords of wood. So anyway, I was like, I got to make this as easy as possible. I mean, if I were going to build it myself, I probably wouldn't have put as much thought and planning into it. I would have just started nailing stuff together and cursed myself halfway through it. But I went into SketchUp, and first I went online for hours and searched for plans, because there's got to be a plan out there that I like. And I found lots of bits and pieces of plans that people had put together. You want it to be sturdy enough on the floor, if you have a floor at all. Some people just eliminate the floor altogether and throw.
I think that's
pallets.
bad practice, because you got all the moisture in the soil coming into the wood.
Well, what a lot of people do is they just build it big enough that they can throw a bunch of pallets down, and when the pallets rot out, they just throw them away and get more, get new ones.
I put my cordwood on pallets.
Yeah. So, and then you obviously want it to breathe from the sides to help it dry out and season the wood better, and you want a simple, sturdy roof. So, I just, as a rule, go with simple metal roofing, because you don't have to worry about sheathing. You just put some boards across the rafters and you screw it down. And I just said, okay, we're going to build this all out of pressure treated lumber.
How tall is that?
At the front, it's almost 8. It's about 8 feet tall at the front and 6.5 feet at the back.
That's a pretty big structure.
Yeah, and so I decided, because I wanted it to go up fast. I didn't want to blow my whole weekend helping build this shed. So I said, how can I make this go really simply?
You got to get Michelle to help you.
Yeah, he was planning on putting those little concrete pier blocks that you just sit on top of the gravel, and then you got to stick a 4x4 in it. And I was like, all the bracing and leveling of all that stuff. So I was like, you know what? Let's build this kind of like bents in a timber frame barn. So what I did is I put a 4x4, 8 foot long at the bottom. And I knew I wanted 3 posts on each bent just to support the weight. It was probably a little overkill, but I figured they'd be leaning wood against it on the inside, so I wanted the walls to be sturdy. And so I 4x4 flat on the ground, 3 posts sticking up from that. I used post base, metal post base, Simpson post bases to tie that all together. And then I laid it on the ground and just laid the rafter across it, just a 10-foot 2x6, and then decided where I wanted to cut it, and made that a template for the rest of them, or measurements for the rest of them, and just built 4 of them on the ground, and then we just tipped them up and braced them while we threw the slat wall and floor pieces on it. It actually went really, really quickly. I mean, it was the friend of mine and another friend, and the 3 of us banged out that whole thing without the metal roof. He didn't have the metal roofing in, but banged out the whole thing in less than a day.
Did you use pneumatic nails or screws?
Everything is screws.
Yeah.
My framing nailer is at my dad's house on Long Island, and I didn't want to go run down there and grab it. And I just knew that we all had a couple of nice impact drivers, and it went really quick with those.
Nice. Looks great.
Thanks.
I'll take one.
All right.
This weekend.
I'll send you the plans.
I still need a woodshed for my 4 cords of split oak, but it's just sitting out there right now. It doesn't even have a tarp on it. I'm kind of embarrassed. One of my neighbors called me on that. He's like, you're just going to ruin all that good wood. And I was like, what's going to happen to it?
Salamander habitat. That's what it's turning into.
Seems fine.
Yeah,
and I'm told it still seasons even if you don't keep it out of the rain.
I mean, I'm sure it does, but my main reason for wanting a wood shed and is in the middle of the winter having to go dig under your tarp to get wood. I mean, that sucks.
Totally. I don't even have a wood stove or any way to burn it, so it seems.
Oh, this is just for your fire pit.
Well, I had to split all these logs from these fallen trees, right?
Yeah.
And I said right after it happened, well, I'm going to buy a wood stove, but it's a $2,000+ investment, and I spend so little on heating oil. Like it's a hard thing to justify to me and my frugal lifestyle.
Mm.
And your small house, you don't have a whole lot of room for a wood stove in there, do you? Or where'd
No, we don't have a whole lot of room, but there's a place to put it, I'm sure. But
yeah,
I've got one of those old Eiffel Scandinavian stoves, finished stoves from the 70s if you need an extra wood stove. You can even hook up a heat exchanger and run hot water out of the back of the thing.
Man, I could have a whole new lifestyle.
Yeah.
I'll build a sauna, have a finished wood stove. Oh, my gosh. So, we got a really interesting first question today. And it's a story that those of us who've been around this business here too often. Dear FHB, I hired a contractor to tear down my existing shed and replace it. The old shed had been chewed up by powder post beetles, red squirrels, and carpenter bees. Anything stored inside would get damaged and ruined by rodents and insects. So, the contractor put up a nice wood-framed, metal-sided, rock wool insulated shed on a concrete pad. It's insulated because the well pressure tank and new water filter are inside and must be kept from freezing. The shed is almost finished. The contractor has been paid in full as the contract requires, but the work is not yet complete. There is no electricity to some of the outlets, no ceiling in part of the shed, no gutter on the roof. He put the pressure tank on a plywood pedestal that is already rotting and moldy. He does not respond to my phone calls, text messages. I'm not being a jerk and blowing up his phone. I've tried to contact him every other week or so, but nothing, silence. I understand that contractor to do several jobs at once, and he probably has other things to do. The shed was begun almost 5 months ago and should have been completed by now, I feel. He is blowing me off, I think because he's been paid in full, and therefore there's no incentive to finish the job. I'm a middle-aged woman, so he thinks he can easily ignore me. There was no completion date stated on the contract. So, Catherine Henry thinks she's SOL. Am I right? How do I get the contractor to complete this job? Do I have any legal rights to stand on? Your podcast discusses professionalism in practice by contractors. This guy personifies the kind of builder who gives your profession a bad reputation. That's something we do not need.
Yeah.
No further
Don't
bad.
need help.
I mean,
We got
I forget what it was for. I saw a commercial recently that it had a homeowner and a contractor speaking what they were thinking and not what they would actually say to each other. And,
Right.
And it just, it's funny because people have this thought. This is the reputation that contractors have, is that they'll show up late. They'll stretch a job out. They'll leave things unfinished at the end if you don't hound them. And obviously, that's not the case for all contractors. I mean, just like any profession, there's good ones and bad ones. And
Contractors hold a special place, though. In fact, I've been told that when people rank the perceptions of respective trades, that contractors fare worse than used car salesmen.
Jeez. How about lawyers?
yeah, well, so let's just try to answer her questions first, but then I think we should probably get into a little bit more about just this reputation.
So, for starters, what should this lady do? I would say keep calling all the time.
Yeah, probably just got to hound the guy a little bit. But I mean, I don't know. I kind of want to back up a little bit to like maybe kind of what was maybe done wrong here. Like she did supply us with a copy of the contract, and there were some things that were kind of missing from it. The New York Attorney General's website actually has like a little like pamphlet or page on their website.
How to hire a contractor?
Yeah, and
That's
it's like
cool.
a home improvement fact sheet, and it lists a whole bunch of stuff that like your contract should have, and her contract is missing some of that stuff, including a start and end date. But they also recommend, not paying in full until the work is complete. I mean, it seems like, I don't know if that means you're SOL, but, it certainly makes it a lot more difficult to get the guy back there if he's already got your money.
But if she has a contract, and she does, the shed is supposed to be completed. So I think she has some legal recourse if it needs to go that far. I think I would not take that approach first, is you need to work with this guy and get him back out there.
Yeah, but there is no end date on this contract.
Yeah.
And it's missing some other stuff, too. I mean, there's like sort of like a little disclaimer or something like that every contract is supposed to have in New York State, and that's missing.
What is that?
It's a long thing, but it says, they call it a consumer notice, and it says the customer has an unconditional right to cancel the contract until midnight of the third business day after the contract was signed. Cancellation must be done in writing, and it goes on with a couple more paragraphs.
But that's a different thing, though. That's meant to protect people from super high pressure salespeople, right? Mm-hmm. The window replacement salesperson who comes to your house and won't leave until you sign a contract.
Well, anyway, that first paragraph. But yeah, if you continue on, then the contractor is legally required to deposit all progress payments received prior to completion in an escrow account or post a bond to protect.
I'm sure he's
payments.
doing that.
Yeah, and they have to let the homeowner know like where that money's going. They have to, so they know that their money's sitting in this escrow account or that this guy's bonded. And if the contractor or some subcontractor who does the work is not paid, he may have a claim against the customer's property under lien law. So none of that was included in their contract. She also talks about some things not being done, like the electrical and the gutters
ceiling.
and the ceiling, and none of that is listed in the contract at all. So I'm not sure if there was if there was additional work that she added on after the fact or what, but all that stuff, including much more specificity about what was supposed to be done, like the actual materials, what the construction details were going to look like.
How many receptacles.
Yeah, all of that stuff should really be in that contract to make sure that they're hitting all the points, because the way it's written, it's really vague.
Yeah, and many home improvement and remodeling contracts are too vague.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see how something small like a shed project like this, you figure it's a small project. I don't have to make a big deal about the details. But I mean, really, no matter how small the project is, it's like getting the details right, communicating everything, making sure everything's documented, make sure that the expectations are clearly communicated. And I went on the NAHB's website and they had a sort of a top 10 list of things to do to make sure you don't get taken advantage of in situations like this. And, in the beginning, they're basically first, just set up your channels of communication before you even consider working with somebody. Get comfortable with communicating with them, and maybe that was the case in the beginning of this job, but but the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and so I'm thinking in this situation now, probably one of the big things to do is just to
keep after him.
Keep after him. Maybe you need to show up and talk to him in person. Maybe I wouldn't recommend this, but a friend of mine. Someone wasn't responding to him for a while at a particular company to some complaint that he had a justified complaint, and he had to send some form to them. He actually took several copies of whatever the form was, put them through his fax machine and taped them back together, and then ran it. So like the thing just kept running and running, like hundreds of pages were spitting out of the fax machine. I'm not sure I would recommend going that far, because obviously if
is funny.
Obviously if this is somebody you have to work with to finish this job, one, you want to still, like you said, you don't want to bug him, but you got to make it clear that this is important to you and for him to finish.
I think that the big problem here is that she paid him in full. Most contractors will want paid upon substantial completion of a project, right? So that's key language. But there should be a small amount of money left on the table so you get all these things punch list done, right? And maybe it's only 5 or 10% of the contract amount, but that's probably your builder's profit, right? Everything else is going to go into overhead and running his or her business and paying people to do the work. So that's the part he's going to be most concerned about.
Sure, and if you've ever talked to any contractors about this sort of thing, you've probably heard this story 100 times about how there were a couple of punch list items that were challenging for them to finish, and that was holding up the entire final payment of the project. So, you could definitely see that a contractor will have incentive to wrap things up.
Yeah.
And, another thing that I saw somewhere as a recommendation, obviously for something small like this shed, maybe it wouldn't be an option, but some people recommend going through an architect, because once you hire an architect, they tend to take on the role, whether it's implied or in the contract, of production management, of project management. And
I don't think that's always the case, but yeah, sure.
But it's certainly, when you're doing a large enough project, the money that you will save by having someone experienced in design and production management might actually pay for itself.
I think there's a discussion here too of how do you find a contractor, right? How did Catherine find this person to build this shed? And I think the best way are referrals from your friends who have used the contractor before and been satisfied. That's certainly the best way. And that Catherine when asked in the future, would you hire this person to build a shed? I'm guessing she's going to say no. So you know, the importance of referrals with remodeling and building clients is the secret to success in the construction business, I would say. So you have to take care of your people.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because any type of business like this where someone's providing a craft or a service, the really good contractors are the ones that don't advertise because they get all their business from referrals.
Absolutely.
So
they don't need to advertise, especially now.
Yeah, so if you don't have any friends that have done any projects recently, drive around your town, look for some work that's going on, and maybe knock on a door, ask a neighbor, or go to your local building department maybe and ask some people. I'm sure there's a 100 different ways you can find who's doing good work in the area.
Yeah, but also look at reviews and stuff. I mean, if you find somebody, see what other people are saying about that person. I mean,
do you find those? I mean, do you trust that stuff?
I don't know that I always trust it, and I will put a caveat here and say that people tend to voice their poor opinions of things before they say something good about them. So you're more likely
if something is fine, it's often not worth talking about, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, negative, everything seems to skew negative on a lot of those sites. That said, I don't want to throw the builder under the bus. I'm not going to name them. But, I mean, I checked out their own Facebook page, and they were poorly rated on their own page. So, I mean, it seems like the people that have worked with them haven't really had the best experiences. So, I mean, that may have been a good place to look to start out.
That's a red flag for sure.
Yeah.
If you can't get good reviews on your own Facebook page, that's a problem.
Right. But I mean, you can check out the Better Business Bureau, look at Angie's List, there's all kinds of things
mixed
out there.
things from contractors who work with Angie's List subscribers. Is that what you call them?
I guess so now. Yeah. It's a subscription model.
So,
now. It used to be free.
Angie's List, I'm told, will give you better ratings if you are a member of them also, right? So it's not exactly a level playing field, but
yeah,
I know people who have had great success hiring contractors from Angie's List. So
yeah,
it's a hard thing.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think the people you can trust the most are the people that you can see face to face.
And right? If you have a contract in the neighborhood, my guess he's going to do a pretty good job for you because he is going to run into you later, right?
Yeah. Well, and this is out near Buffalo, where she's located. And I mean, I live in New York, and a lot of New York, you don't have to be licensed to do certain carpentry jobs.
Yeah.
Especially out in the middle of nowhere, just like any guy with a truck and a ladder
is a
can
contractor.
Call himself a contractor.
Yeah.
Well, totally. And even if you are required to be licensed in a particular area, that doesn't necessarily mean that half the guys are even licensed, or that really qualifies them for. Yeah. I mean, when I had a remodeler's license in Connecticut, it was basically just I sent a check to the Secretary of State or.
Was there any test, Rob?
No, not for what I was doing.
Can you fill out your name on a check?
I think that's basically
can read and write the form.
Yeah, I think in a lot of places licensing like that is more just for recording of you being a legitimate business than it is for your qualifications as a craftsperson.
Mm-hmm.
So you just can't assume that because someone's licensed that means they're good at their job. It just means they're legally allowed to do their job.
I got to say, I would never hire any contractor I could afford. That is just not in my DNA.
I'm sure you're going to get a lot of good work out of that, Patrick.
Catherine, we wish you the best. Let us know how it turns out. My guessing is if you start calling that guy every couple of days, he's going to show up.
Yeah, and if that doesn't work, I mean, you may have some legal recourse. It may be worth going to a lawyer with that contract and just
oftentimes
seeing if
it just takes a letter from the lawyer that we're pursuing a small claims case, and I bet you'll get your shed finished.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember Father Chris Winklejohn?
Yeah.
How could you forget, right?
Yeah,
of course.
This is the priest on the
Panhandle
of Florida who was recently flooded. And we answered his question 2 weeks in a row now, right? First is his question, then we talked about his observation that the Habitat homes in the Florida Panhandle also performed very well in the high winds and storm. So, of course, he sent another question, right?
He's back again. Yep.
Why wouldn't he? My AC units in the rectory, the priest's house, he puts in parentheses, will have to be replaced because of the storm surge. Does it make sense to have an alternative to traditional AC in Florida, like geothermal cooling? I saw it a lot on this old house a few years ago. Is that currently a viable and useful technology for saving on energy costs? What would something like that entail? So let's first let's clarify what is geothermal cooling.
Well, it's sort of a misnomer.
It's a misnomer for sure.
There is such thing as geothermal heating or cooling
in
but
Iceland.
Yeah.
Yeah, not in the U.S.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say they're probably in Arkansas or someplace where there are hot springs. You have
Or caves.
geothermal,
Yeah.
which is actually water being heated by
The ground and groundwater.
the tectonic action. Is
Yeah.
that right? I'm in geology now, which has never been my strong suit.
Yeah. Well, it depends. Yeah, it really depends on the environment that you're in. But yeah, I mean, you have geothermal heating and cooling, even just in in Florida as well. I mean, even without there being tectonic or volcanic heat in the ground, there is sort of like a static temperature that the ground's at.
So that's what we're talking about here,
That
right?
gets back to what we're talking about, which
Right. So
basically is
A ground source heat pump.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're using the relatively consistent temperature of the soil to either warm or cool some kind of fluid that you're then in turn pumping into the house or pumping out of the house, right?
Yep.
And the idea there is that we've had heat pumps which contribute to air conditioning in most climates and heat in more southern climates for decades, and most people understand that the older heat pumps just couldn't extract enough heat from cold air to get heat, and now we have much more efficient air source heat pumps
That work down to 20 below zero.
that work great. And so the ground source heat pumps were in an effort to basically get a source for that heat transfer when you couldn't from the cold air.
And the only problem with a ground source heat pump is it's very complex and expensive.
It's very expensive. I mean, that would be my number one reason not to do this down there. I mean, I think the estimates that I saw were
10 grand or more.
yeah, maybe 20 to 25,000. And since you're dealing with an existing lot, I have no idea what the size of this lot is, but a lot of times when you're trying to do this, with an existing home, you have to go vertically.
You drill wells.
Yeah. So the way this works is you have like a loop, and if you have like a big empty lot, you can do that loop horizontally, and then build your house, and there's no big problem with disturbing like a big site that's already disturbed anyway. Yeah.
So the issue is you have to put these pipes in the ground, and there's a lot of site disturbance, and it takes up a lot of room, right?
Yeah. And so because of that, you end up going vertically a lot of times when you already have houses there. And that's much more expensive because, as you mentioned, you got to drill down for that. You got to drill down hundreds of feet. So it's like almost like drilling multiple wells to put these loops in.
It's very much like that. In fact, my well driller who drilled my water well the previous week was drilling wells for I'm going to call it a ground source heat pump.
And the ground source heat pumps, I mean, are they really do people use them as much for cooling as they do for heating? I mean, I guess you would, because but in a cooling climate, the air source heat pumps, which are basically regular air conditioner units, are so much more efficient nowadays than that. Just replacing the components of his existing air conditioning system with new components will give him a lot more efficiency depending on how old his equipment is.
I think ground source heat pumps make a lot of sense for huge structures, commercial buildings, and it makes more sense if you have a lot of load, right? You have a swimming pool or whatever that you're trying to heat, then it probably makes more sense than it would a single family home. So I think, Father Chris, I would steer clear of the ground source heat pump for your cooling. It's going to be very expensive, and the site disturbance at a minimum would be a hassle, potentially. Tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, so basically, just by working with modern air conditioning equipment, he's probably at an advantage over what he had already anyway.
Yeah. I did see some study, it was specific to Florida, and they did upgrades or retrofits of various ducted mini-split systems or ductless mini-split systems into various houses. And they did find that some ducted mini-split systems seemed to work pretty well in some older houses. So they had also had something they called a ducted multi-split, which had, I think, one ductless mini-split and then like a multi-head ducted system, and that didn't perform so well.
What was the problem?
They just said there were comfort issues. I think they said there was still cost savings, but I don't think was getting down to the temperatures that people wanted.
So here's something else, and this is a little unrelated, but Father Chris, you got to get a good engineer or a good contractor to do a real, we call it a heat load in the north. I don't know what you call it in Florida. A cooling load, to determine how much AC you need, right? These systems are horribly oversized generally on the times, often 2 times bigger than they need to be. And that takes a real hit in efficiency and comfort, more importantly, because these units, when they're oversized, just don't run long enough to dehumidify adequately. And when you try to do that, it makes the space too cold. So before you hire a contractor to replace those units, make sure that they're going to do a good heat load calculation.
Yeah, and back to the mini splits. So basically, what a mini split is you have a smaller version of an air conditioner compressor outdoors, and then you have a small distribution unit indoors, as opposed to a big unit for your entire house outdoors, set up to an air handler that runs ducts throughout the entire house. And in the old days, those systems would have 1 or 2 zones, maybe, and that would run the whole house. So you'd have maybe uneven cooling throughout the house. And as Patrick pointed out, the systems would be these single-speed systems that would turn on and off, and depending on the temperature, they might not run long enough. The thing about these newer systems with the mini splits is you can have very specific zones for different portions of your house, so you have the right amount of cooling for that. And they are also variable speed compressors and fans throughout these systems, so that they are always running. Sometimes they're just barely running at all, and that way the equipment runs a lot more efficiently. It's running continuously to continuously dehumidify and cool the space, and that's a big part of where the energy savings comes from.
And those capabilities are now found in central systems too, like ones with ductwork. You can have, I know Carrier and Bryant both make variable speed compressors with variable speed blower equipment, and they will modulate down to dehumidify when necessary and when the loads are small. And by all accounts, they work very well. And that would be quite an upgrade for his existing system with ducts.
But yeah, I mean, this almost goes back to our first question. It's like, really, the way you're going to get what you need for your space is to find a contractor who's qualified to identify the needs in the space and sell you the right system.
Yeah, because it's so easy they always oversize, and I don't know why there's incentive to do that. The skeptical part of me says it's because the bigger equipment costs more money, but...
Well, it's also because there's no callbacks for comfort problems, because if you oversize the system, theoretically, you're putting in more than enough to meet all the needs of the comfort of
no matter what the temperature
is. Yep.
Yeah. That's just what you do if you're an HVAC contractor. This is from Brandon Matthias Sweet. Brandon doesn't say where he's from, but hello, Fine Homebuilding folks. What product recommendation would you suggest for sealing between the garage door apron and the asphalt driveway, or any other sidewalk cracks for that matter as well? Thank you for doing what you do. I think he's talking about the podcast.
I hope so.
It's not for my editorial work, that's for sure.
My miniature podium racing.
You guys have an opinion on this?
I don't know that I have specific products in mind. I mean, I looked up some. We had a pretty cracked up driveway, and my girlfriend went through and did all the sealing work and everything over the summer. She's a teacher, so she had a couple months off. And the stuff we used was just like came in like a 1 gallon jug.
And you squirted in the
and
cracks?
you squirt it in, and then you kind of spread it out.
It's
with
asphalt?
I don't know. I think it was a latex-based thing. And then you just spread it out with a putty knife, and it looks bad. And then you go over it with the with the resealer or the sealer, and it looks good when it's all done. And
you mean then you coat the entire driveway
then you do
with
the whole driveway
tar?
with it. Yeah.
Yeah, but if we're talking about individual cracks here, I mean, what that brand is it Sika?
Sika.
Yeah, Sika has a whole line of different types of sealants and adhesives,
And
all
they
for very
specialize in kind of concrete stuff, right?
masonry work. Yeah. So off the top of my head, I don't know which particular. I mean, basically it says right on the bottle of the tube. They come in tubes. You would run in a caulking gun. So if you're sealing small cracks, it's definitely a respected brand, and I believe they even sell it in Home Depot. I'm not sure. But,
Yes, they do.
But I would say, look at the packaging for the application, and that in that brand, you're going to find something that's going to work well. They also do a lot of really good adhesives for masonry too.
Yeah, not having a picture of this and seeing how big it is, just clean out that crack. If you have to
Use some compressed air.
Yeah, use some compressed air, a brush, whatever. Get all the gunk out of there. You may want to get some backer rod.
What's that for?
That's to fill any large gaps, because you don't want to just fill that whole thing with caulk. One, that'll be expensive.
And it won't work because it won't
work.
be elastic, right? It'll
Right.
The thinner you make the caulk layer, the more elastic it is. The thicker you make it, then it tends to pull away from the materials it's sealing to, right?
Yeah. So fill that with backer rod and then go over with, what the product that he just mentioned. I also saw one that people seem to like was DAP Premium Polyurethane Construction Adhesive Sealant. And it has concrete written on the little band around the top of the tube. And I think that's pretty easy to get. But yeah, it seems like it's formulated pretty much for this kind of application. That's another one.
Yeah,
so I have a company that I really like their stuff, and I have, to be honest, I have not tried their material made for crack repair, but the company's called Sash Co. And their product they make that I really like is called Big Stretch, which is a latex caulk that has really good elongation properties, if I could be so geeky as to use that phrase. It stretches really well, and it's good for seasonal movement especially. So I love that. And they make a product for concrete repair called Slab.
Sounds, yeah.
And I would be very willing to try that because I like the company. They make good stuff. They started out making sealants for their... So this company used to make metal window sash, and they started making sealants for that, and then that became a much bigger business than the metal windows that we used to have. So that's good stuff.
Another one I saw that looked pretty fun. It looked like it would be fun to use if you have a propane torch.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah, it's something called crack sticks. It came in like a bucket, and it's basically, it looks sort of like backer rod, but it's made out of, I don't know, some sort of polyurethane or something like that.
So you put that in the crack and then heat it with a torch?
You stick it in the crack, and then you burn it.
That sounds healthy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it sort of levels out and smooths out. So,
Can we try that anyway?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some cracks out in the
Product
parking
review
lot
coming
to
up.
fix.
Yep.
Oh, man, that's good. What's it called?
Crack sticks.
That's great.
STIX.
Yeah, X, of course.
Yep.
Oh, boy.
Keeping up with the kids.
How big a torch do you need?
I don't know. The one they had was, one of the ones with
Like a
the,
weed dragon?
Is that what they call that?
Those
I don't
weed
know.
dragons are those blowtorch things you hook up to like a barbecue grill tank for killing your weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind.
Yeah, Rob's used one of those.
Yeah, you turn it on, it sounds like a jet engine. My wife heard it. I heard me light it in the driveway from the kitchen, and she was scared.
It sounds very much like a hot air balloon, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was burning some weeds in my driveway with one of those one day, and then I realized that the asphalt started bubbling up out of the driveway. I had to kind of back it off a little bit.
Yeah.
So-
This stuff I think was for concrete. I don't think you were using this on asphalt, but
When I use mine, I use it to kill the weeds in the gravel driveway. It always gets my neighbors to watch. Like,
They're
they
recording it
peer
for-
from the car window, look at what I'm doing.
So you want to know what I used that thing for not long ago? Just sort of did a test run. I've always been fascinated with that. how do you pronounce that Japanese charred wood?
So Shoshugiban?
Shugi. Yeah. So even before that became this popular.
Are you sure that's right?
Something like that. I don't know. That may be wrong.
Yeah.
Just making up words now.
Before that, that's kind of a trend right now, and there's a couple of good companies that, even importing that stuff from Japan or making it in the Northwest, and it's the whole idea is you take the surface of a board that you're going to use as this exterior cladding and you char it because that will make it impervious to mold.
I think what it
and
does is
bugs
converts the sugars in the wood to smoke.
Yeah. But I had even heard, I don't know if this is true, but I even heard that back in, medieval times or like Tudor England, those old half-timbered houses, that they would light a smoky fire inside the house and essentially smoke the timber frame to keep the beetles from eating the wood.
While you're living in there?
No, but when they built the thing.
It's like, there's not going to be any beetles.
Yeah. Wasn't that also like a treatment for like pole barns and stuff? They would sort of like burn the ends of the timbers before they stuck them in the ground. I think that was a common practice.
I've never heard that.
Well,
I don't know.
So back to the torch, though, the way they traditionally would do that is they would stack several boards facing each other and light a small fire and turn it into something like a chimney, and then that flame would go up the chimney and evenly char the entire board. But that's, I just wanted to try it. So I grabbed that torch and threw some cedar planks down on the gravel in my backyard, and in seconds I had my own Japanese charred wood siding. I haven't actually used it for anything yet, but
that is one building product I just do not get. But different strokes for different folks. But I think your siding should not be on fire at any point in its installation or lifespan. I don't know.
Well,
you say it's popular, like.
Well,
I mean, like, really?
No, seriously. in sort of like modern design circles, it's really become a popular form of board siding.
I kind of think it stinks. Doesn't it smell like?
When it rains, maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. But it is. It's a really stark look. It does look pretty nice on the right house.
I'll put a link to it in the podcast. So there's a company that I used to work with called Hudson Company. They're up in Pine Plains, I think it is, in New York.
Yeah, they're pretty much right next to me, yeah.
And they've done some interesting sort of twists on that. They're their own versions of it where they do sort of like a rubbed version where it basically looks more like a weathered barn board. So there's a lot of, there's different, like you said, different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
But
that's... maybe something I'll experiment with at some point, but maybe not. All right, so good morrow. Is that a real greeting?
Yeah, I think you got to read this one with a British accent. Good morrow.
My name is Brett Johnson. For the last couple months, it seems that the topic of negative pressure and backdrafts due to combustion appliances in otherwise tight spaces. As a hypothetical exercise, I love these, by the way, what would the viability be of having a room that isn't airtight, that you put most of the appliances, like your mechanical equipment, we'll say, excluding a fireplace? I think that means you'd put all these things in there except the fireplace, right?
Yeah.
Okay. To clarify, all rooms but one are airtight and in the same system. The last room, while attached to the house, has been isolated and allowed to breathe. My thought is that this would allow air to the devices without causing drafts in the house. So this would provide plenty of makeup air, and there's no concern that an exhaust fan somewhere else in the house is going to pull those combustion gases into the living space. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as we start building more and more airtight homes for energy efficiency purposes and air quality purposes, mechanical rooms, this is a pretty common practice nowadays to put a makeup air vent to the outside, or some of the appliances have their own makeup air pipes directly to them.
Yeah.
That's really the safest thing to do, is to have a dedicated line going to each appliance. And if you have one of those condensing boilers, they have these concentric venting systems where the exhaust goes out through, is it the center, and the intake air, the combustion air comes in around.
I think that's right.
Yeah, and that's also, I guess, possibly preheating the air as it's coming into the appliance. I'm not sure exactly, but
To what end, Rob?
Yeah, I know. but more to the point is that you are making sure that it's a closed loop. There's no chance
and
for
the thing
that.
won't run if it's not venting, which is great, right?
Sure.
You know something is a problem because you have no heat instead of knowing there's a problem because you don't wake up.
Right.
Yeah, but if you're thinking of using this for a conventional appliance that requires air from the space that it's in for combustion, then the key is that if you're going to do that, and if you're really going to go all out and do this and make a dedicated space with its own intake air duct, you just as important is to make sure that that room is truly air sealed from the rest of the house. I mean, typically a boiler room is in the basement or some other semi-finished or unfinished space, and it's easy to forget that that has to be a separate airspace. And you might have the house well air sealed, but then I found an article on Green Building Advisor where they were talking about testing to make sure that you have
that the room is air sealed.
The room is truly airtight, and so you're running a fan or a blower door in there and having a smoke stick or some other smoke source. So that you can actually pressurize the room or depressurize the room and see if there's any air movement into other spaces that could be getting into the house.
Absolutely, because otherwise it's just a room that's part of the house, so it has to be completely separate. This is a method of dealing with makeup air, especially in commercial buildings. You will often see a huge grate on the side of a mechanical room that goes right out to the outside for that very reason. So you need that. Those big appliances need more air, so they have to have a big grill. And we have to remind folks that you still need a carbon monoxide detector in case someone leaves the door open or whatever, right?
Yeah. Well, my big question was are you accessing this room from the inside? Because sealing that door seems like it would be a big pain in the butt.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
You need an exterior door, right?
Yeah.
And it's got to be weather stripped.
Yeah. Seal it all. So
and
you can't get into it from the inside.
And the other thing you got to keep in mind, too, is that there are minimum space requirements for appliances, right? So if you put them all jam tight in this small mechanical room, there might not be enough. It might not pass code.
You're not going to put a gas water heater and a condensing boiler in a coat closet and have enough makeup air, even if you have a duct going to the outside. If you do, you got to make sure that duct going to the outside is sized based on the airflow that you need for those devices. So,
and the equipment manufacturers all require a certain amount of space around those units, so you have to be mindful of that too. You can't just jam a bunch of stuff in there just because it fits. You need space around them. They're assuming that they need to get off heat, and you have to be able to work on them. So
there's definitely going to be some math involved. I'll put a link in the podcast on the website. There are a couple of good articles on greenbuildingadvisor.com that talk about not just testing for this, but also what are sort of the common pitfalls to look for. Like if you're in a basement and you've got a boiler room, you might assume that the fire blocking is a good enough air seal between that space, and if it's an unfinished room, it just has no drywall in there, and they're basically giving you pointers on where to look for the possible air leaks back into your conditioned space.
Very important. Good question though, and combustion safety should be on the top of everyone's mind. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Rob and Matt for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions, fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening, whether it be YouTube, go ahead, the website, or iTunes.
Sorry. Before you go, I just want to remind you, we mentioned it last week, but we are in the Taunton Store holiday season, and head on
20% off?
Head on, there's a 20% off code. You'll find it when you get to the website.
GIFT20 is the code, right?
That's what we said last time.
That's what we said last time.
Right. No, but head on over there, and we'll throw some links in the podcast on the website for some of our suggested books that everyone would love to have if they're into home building.
Get the code check. Hey, thanks for joining me, guys. Thank you all. Happy building.